This is Brian Gomez at PastPerfect Software. Today we're going to be talking about volunteer hours. Volunteer hours is something that most organizations have to contend with, and we tried to build a piece of PastPerfect that will allow you to track your volunteer hours. I want to start by launching a poll. The poll is basically, do you use PastPerfect to track your volunteer hours now? There's going to be a variety of different people in this class. This class is being broadcast at least to 3 countries that I know about, so I'm sure we'll get a lot of different feedback. We're going to be going through 3 sections today. Those 3 sections are going to be adding volunteer hours to a contact record, setting up your projects, and then reporting on your projects and your volunteer hours. All right, so I've got pretty good feedback on this poll. If you haven't answered yet, go ahead and give me an answer. I'll close the poll and share the results. There you go. So it sounds like this class or this webinar is being offered at about the right time for people who are starting to record the volunteer hours soon. That's great. So there's 3 big reasons for tracking your volunteer hours. One is volunteer recognition, being able to recognize the people that are giving high levels of contribution to your organization. Another one is project tracking and planning, knowing how much time projects are taking and being able to plan going forward how much time projects should take. And the third, and probably arguably most important, is for grant proposals and funding. Many funding organizations look very favorably upon you being able to document that you have so many volunteer hours that have been given in the past, and therefore feel that you can draw on those same volunteer hours in the future. It shows a level of commitment toward the project that they are hoping to fund, or that you are hoping that they fund anyway. So I've hit the results here, and we're at the main menu of PastPerfect. So when we're talking about volunteers, I think that probably the first place to go and look in this evaluation copy of the software is to see how many volunteers that we currently have. If I click on Contact Lists, and then look down the right-hand side here, you're going to see a line for volunteers. And this volunteer section is looking at one field in the contacts data table to tell whether or not people are volunteers. I'm going to go ahead and leave this screen, but know that this is a pretty good place to come and start a mailing for a group of people that are volunteers. So if you wanted to send out a mass email or a mass mailing, trying to get your volunteers together for the annual picnic or whatever you're trying to do, this is one way to do that. And it would be very much a shotgun approach to call on all volunteers. There's other ways to do it too. We probably won't get to too many of them today, but if you have questions about it, contact our support office. I'm going to exit out from here and come back into the contact screen. And the person I want to work with today is Karen Slater. So I'm going to do find, and I know that her ID number is 6. If I didn't know that, I would look her up by last name. And here's Karen Slater. Karen right now is a member and a donor. If I'm on her mailing address screen, you can see where she lives. And then down here toward the center of the bottom, we have A list, B list, all the way down to volunteer. And her volunteer box right now is not checked. This is the one box that puts you on the volunteer list back at that fixed list screen we were just at. It's also going to change her status up here at the top where you have her membership and donor information. So I'm going to click on Edit, and then put a check mark in volunteer, and then click on the save. And what you'll see is up at the top there, she also now is listed as a volunteer. Now real quick, I'll flash back out to the contacts list and see that the number of volunteers has now increased up to 18. All right, so I'm going to exit back out into my contacts screen, so we're back at Karen Slater. For those of you who don't use PastPerfect, this is going to seem a little overwhelming. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of screens that you've never seen before. But the contact screen, and this contact screen holds the attributes of the human being, Karen Slater. And Karen is now listed as a volunteer. Now you'll notice on the left-hand side, partway down, there's a sidebar, and the 5th button down for that sidebar is volunteer. Now you'll notice there's not a green data light. The green data light in PastPerfect is used to show that there's additional information to be seen here. And right now, the volunteer sidebar button is not lit up with a green data light because there's no additional information to see yet. And we're going to change that now. So the volunteer button is on the sidebar will get us to the volunteer information screen. We're going to go through each one of these fields and record some volunteer hours now. So the first field that we have is volunteer status. In order to make any changes in the PastPerfect contact records, we do need to click on Edit. So I'm going to go into Edit mode and hit the down arrow next to volunteer status. And you can see the status that we give you as part of the basic program. These come preloaded. You can change them, but I haven't really had anyone say that we really want to change them to something that I want to share with everyone else. Active, in training, inactive, and pending. I guess retired might be the one that you might add to it. That they're no longer going to be a volunteer, that they've left the volunteer corps. They're not just inactive for a period of time. So I'm going to make Karen an active volunteer. And the next fields I come to as I work my way down here are when is Karen available. Now this available from and until is useful information for your seasonal volunteers, people that are only going to be available for maybe March through September, and you even know what dates that you can count on them. This is not a good place to record the date of birth of this volunteer. And when I say date of birth, I mean the date that they first started volunteering until the last date that they ended volunteering. Instead, use this more on the idea of scheduling and planning. These fields are not required, and for many organizations, they're not relevant. People are available all year round on certain days of the week, which brings us down to the next series of boxes. If Karen's available on Sunday, I put a check mark in Sunday. Karen's available on Saturday, I put a check mark in Saturday. Whichever one has a check mark in it, behind the scenes in the database, that is true. That check mark means true, and you'll see that a little bit later. Additional hours and availability. This is an unlimited memo field. You can type in whatever you want here. Putting in the additional hours that Karen is available from noon until 5 on Saturday and early Sunday mornings would give you more description. But because that's a free-form field, it's hard to do much reporting on it. Good for looking at records one by one to figure out if Karen is available at a certain time. Not so good for database reporting. The next thing down is skills and work preferences. And again, all of these fields are optional. At the very least, just getting the hours in that the people are working is sort of the most important part of this webinar. What skills and work preferences are available? This is not authority file fed yet, but we just put in a suggestion this morning to make it authority file fed. That is to say, there's no controlled vocabulary for this field. And you want to have a controlled vocabulary for this field because you don't want people putting in computer work sometimes, data entry other times, data processing other times. Because when you go to look for people that might be able to help you with your PastPerfect data entry, you'd have to look under each one of those things. So my best advice for this field is create your own little cheat sheet of the skills that you want to have available, and then stick to that list. I think in the next revision or two of PastPerfect, you're going to see this as authority file fed, that you'll be able to pull information from a list rather than have to free-form type it each time. Obviously, emergency contact is for each individual contact that is a volunteer. If something were to happen while they were on site, this is where we would go to get the information for who we should call or what we should do. So you'll see that field, emergency contact, there. All right, I'm going to move over to the right-hand side of the screen. So far, what we've talked about is attributes of the contact on the left-hand side of the screen. Now we're going to talk about the work that they're actually doing. And this grid on the right-hand side will populate as we add more and more volunteer activities. Now, I'm done editing Karen's contact record. So before I can enter in any volunteer hours, I need to save the record. So when I click on Save here, you'll notice the volunteer green data light came on. And on the right-hand side, I now have the ability to click on this plus sign. All right, so step 1, you have to go to the person, Karen Slater. Step 2, you have to enter in the volunteer hours. If you click on this plus sign here, it opens up a new subscreen. And this new subscreen is sort of a receipt for or a form that it will create a new posting of volunteer hours. So, for instance, Karen was doing some park and statue cleanup for us back on 11/20/2012. I'm a little bit behind on my record keeping here. She did 3 hours worth of work, and I want to make sure that I put that into the right grouping of park and statue cleanup. So I have to scroll down here a little bit. Park and statue cleanup. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about activity and location, but I am purposely skipping those for now. I'll hopefully get back to this. The notes portion is for the any additional notes about this work. If this is how you're managing the projects that you're doing, that you're keeping notes here, that's what it's there for. If there was a certain thing that was done or a certain thing that happened that day while it was happening, maybe this is a place to record the notes. We really left these fields open and free-form for you. So I'm done. I'm going to click on Save, and you'll see that in this grid, I have now 11/20/2012, code 100, Parks and Statue Cleanup, no activity listed, and 3 hours. And a total down at the bottom, which says that Karen has volunteered for 3 hours so far. All right. Just a note that I noticed when I was working in PastPerfect, and we've seen this over the years with our company, that these grids on the right-hand side, like you see, they sometimes don't populate immediately when you save or post a posting. If you feel like you did it right, try closing out of contacts and coming back in to see if it shows up. It's a little bug in FoxPro, I believe, because we haven't been able to pin it down to exactly how it's happening. It's really inconvenient. So we're going to do this again. So Karen's also volunteered. Besides 11/20, she did the park and statue cleanup also on 12/1. And those who are really studious in this class will have noticed that that those are not Saturdays or Sundays, so she must have worked at different days. So again, 3 hours, and I'm going to pick her project, and her project is Park and Statue Cleanup, and post it. And then I'm going to post a last one, and for those who can hear the dog barking in the background, that's our office dog, Lucy. I apologize for that. And she also, back at the end of November, helped with some parking lot improvement work. So that was 11/30, 2012, 2 hours, and parking lot improvement. All right. So I've recorded the last few weeks' worth of work that Karen's done for us. Park and statue cleanup. Here you got your hours listed, and then a summary down toward the bottom right. So what about these projects and activities? Let's move over to the setup area of PastPerfect and take a look at how we enter that information. So I'm going to click on Exit here, click on Setup, then Contacts. Once I'm in Contacts, down toward the bottom there is Volunteer Projects. Click on Volunteer Projects, and you'll see a listing of our volunteer projects. Now I have another screen I'm going to pull up here in front of this one. The screen we're looking at now is an Excel sheet that I created. And I was going to put this online and say, hey, you guys could download this and use it yourself. But it's so simple, I figured that you could generate it. If you do want a copy of it, send me an email, brian@museumsoftware.com. I'll be happy to email it to you. But basically, it's trying to show that I'm grouping things. There's two different options here. So I want you to look at everything above line 11 in the OR. This is how I prefer to set it up. I have my quarterly mailing, my 600 group. That's the only mailing I do, so it's the only thing that has a 600 level. I have lecture registration, my 300 group. Anything else that had to do with lectures that I might add in the future, if I have future volunteer responsibilities in that lecture program I have, would probably also be 300. And then you'll notice my tours, all highlighted here in green. 500s. Even though they're called different things, I would like to report on them as a group. So I've grouped them all as 500 level. All right? Art show planning, setup, and sales, I've also grouped as 400. Now, I said before that you could use activities, but I prefer to use my project names as a way to give enough definition of the project. I don't really need to use activities. And the reason I don't like to use activities is because sometimes they can get crossed up. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not, but my cursor right now is over summer. If I have an activity of summer, and because it's not linked to its parent tour, I could have art show summer, or art show holiday, or art show elementary. And because I can generate that kind of ambiguity, I really don't want to create that model. The only time I can really see that using activities is really a good idea is for something like a living history organization, where interpretation is the main volunteer activity. People that are in period dress, doing first person or whatever interpretation, you might have the activity be, the project being interpretation, but your activity might be based on maybe what house at the museum that they were doing the interpretation, or what subject matter, right? So there's where I can see activity and location being worthwhile. But for this, my fictitious organization, I feel like using project name only is a better way for me to record these hours, decrease the ambiguity during data entry, and increase my reporting capabilities. All right, so let me close out of that screen, and we'll be back here at the project name. Now, these are shown in alphabetical order. So one of the reasons I like that other screen that I showed you, the Excel file, is that I can sort it a number of different ways. But you'll see here my art show planning, art show sales, and art show setup are all code 400s. To add a new project, you click on this plus down here at the bottom. And if we want to add art show cleanup, and code 400 as well, and add, you'll see art show cleanup showing up. All right, so that's creating these projects. If you mistype something, you need to edit it. You single click on it and then click on this button here for editing. If you want to remove a project, and I will tell you to be cautious about doing this, deleting entries here for volunteer projects can have unintended consequences elsewhere. It would be better to just continue to add to them. All right, so that's edit and then delete. So I'm going to exit back out to the main menu of PastPerfect, and we're going to record a few more hours for Karen, because Karen has been involved in our art show project. So I'm going to go to Contacts, and then again, we're just recording additional hours here, so plus. And this time, Karen helps, I'm looking at a cheat sheet here, so she's helping with setup on the 10th. So 12/10/2012, she put in 2 hours for setup, art show setup, save, and then on 12 today, actually. So when you need today's date, if your program is set up this way, you can probably just hit F8 on your keyboard. So F8, and she's put in 3 hours of sales work today. So art show sales. So I'm going to save this record. Save that volunteer hours record, and then I can see on my screen now I've got 3 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, a total of 13 hours. So next I want to talk a little bit about reporting. There's a couple of great questions on the question board. If you change the name of a project, will all of the project names that are part of the volunteer hours change? And the answer is no. You do not want to change something that you've already been running for a while. So if you decide parks and statue cleanup, you really want to see the word "and" in there. I would highly advise that you don't do that. You're going to be creating inconsistencies in your data. If you really need to do something like that, and we need to run global updates with you to clean up your data, please contact me, and we will help you do so. All right. So I want to get to reporting now. This hopefully will be a nice short webinar before the holiday. Under Contacts, if you want to print out a report, a paper report, for everything that Karen has done for us, the easiest way to do it is right from her contact record. And I'm going to click on the Preview button here. Once I click that preview button, the next screen that will come up will be a listing of all of the hours that Karen has ever given us. Okay? So if you have a 10-year volunteer who comes in twice a week, this list would use a lot of paper. So I'm going to close out from there. The other place to get reports on projects and volunteer projects is from the Reports menu of PastPerfect. So I've left Contacts, exited out, and now I'm back on the main menu. And if I click on this Reports button here, on the left-hand side, I have all of my different areas for reporting. I'm going to come down to Contacts, and then look to the right. We've got volunteer hour detail, volunteer hour summaries, volunteer hours for one contact. This is the one we just ran. We ran this report for Karen at her contact record. But what if I wanted to know about all of the efforts that we have put into the art show so far this year? So we're looking at all of the project planning and things like that. If I want to know about a project code, I can go to this report here, Volunteer Hours Summary by Project Code. Now, when I double-click on that or click on Run Selected Report, it's going to bring up the same window, whichever of these three that I click on. But where that radio button is, project name, volunteer, or project code, and what it says up in the report title will change. So selecting it from the start is the best way to do it. You can change it down here at the bottom if you want, but second best. All right, so what project code am I concerned about? Well, I know my art show is all about the 400 project, so I hit the down arrow, select 400. I don't have to select project names, and this is the beauty of grouping them that way. I want to know about everything that's been done so far in 2012 for this art show, and I want to preview it. There you go. I get the people who have been involved, what their names are. Each one of their activities gets recorded here, as well as what project name it's going under. So you can see for the entire project code, 400, I see 49 hours have been put in. And for the first 5 records, it's all about the planning. For the next 4 records, it's all about the sales, and the last 3 is all about setup. But maybe I want to have each of those subtotaled as well. Let's see if we can do that with the existing reports. I actually didn't try this beforehand, which is a #1 violation. So let's exit from here, and we're going to do volunteer hours summary by project name. And then I'm still going to select my project code, and let's see what happens. Yeah, there we go. Great. So now we can see our art show planning took 19 hours, our show sales took 16 hours, and art show setup 14 hours. My colleague Sarah is sitting behind me here and is probably saying, "Ooh, he's lucky on that one." So after I'm going to close out of that preview screen and just take another look at this volunteer hours selection screen. Notice you can change the date range here. If you're interested in looking at what a certain volunteer has done for us in this certain year or certain month, this would be a way to isolate that time period. So let me exit back out and start instead from the volunteer hours summary by volunteer. So if I want to know everything that Rick Hilton has done for this organization in the last year, I would start here. Double-click on it. All project codes, all project names, only for 2012, and then click on Preview. Let me see. I think I did something wrong here. I'm in the Volunteer Hours Summary Report. So this is volunteer hours. Yeah, my bad. Okay, so I got away with the first one, but not the second one. We're going to have to ignore that last one. The only way to get how much a volunteer has given in a certain year for only one volunteer would be actually to do it either from the contact screen or from the report maker. All right, so that's the volunteer hours showing how to do it by project code, how to do it by project name, and how to do it by volunteer with a summary report. Let's see. That's about all I have planned to show you. What I think to take away from this webinar is if you're really consistent on your data entry, if you set up your projects right so that you have things grouped appropriately, what you're going to have next year when it comes time to plan the art show or plan the next holiday tour is a round number on how many volunteers you're going to need and how many hours that they're going to work. This information, starting now, will really pay off in future planning. So hopefully that's been helpful. So there's a number of questions on the board. I'm going to go through and answer the questions that I can live. If we don't get to your question today or I didn't answer it live and you want to talk, please send me an email, brian@museumsoftware.com, and we can set up a time to talk. All right, so how would I change options for the volunteer status drop-down, as there are two other options I would like to add to my own drop-down? Great question. So let's click on Setup, and then go to Authority Files, and then Contacts. This is where you can change your volunteer status, but you can also change your volunteer activities and locations. So if you decide to go with Plan B on that using activities part, this is where the authority file for those activities and locations gets built in. So I'm going to do the volunteer status one. Right now you see active, in training, inactive, pending, and I think I said I would try retired. And once I hit enter on the keyboard, it will now be one of my options. So I hope that helps, Mandy. Birthdays. Those date fields should not be used for birthdays. There are other places in PastPerfect to record birthdays. If you take a look at a contact record, and I believe it's under biography information, you have a birthday field. So if you're going to be recording the birthdays of your volunteers, please put it in your biography information. Can you create your own authority file for projects? I think that question was asked before I started. I think you saw where to do that. If you want to create your own project list, you go to Setup, and then Contacts, and then Volunteer Projects, and this is where that authority file is set up. So Ron sent in his request to Sarah to have a new report made, which I think is a great suggestion, Ron. Thanks for that. The question, I'll just answer it again here for Penny. I saw it pop up earlier, and I did say something about it. If you go through and change the holiday tours to the late December tours because someone finds holiday offensive, it will not change the records that have already been generated to the holiday tours. It's not an authority file global change back over to the data. It will just make it so holiday tours is no longer choosable when you're recording hours, and late December tours will be includable. Now, because we're coding these things, if you don't change the code, you'd still be able to report on it, but there'd still be a level of ambiguity or lack of symmetry in your data, which I would be cautious about. So I would try not to rename things. Adding new might be an answer, but if you do need to rename things and you want to do it globally, let's talk. How do I update fields in the volunteer status drop-down menu? I think we saw that one already, but just one more time for it is Setup and Authority Files, and then under Contacts. That's our volunteer status. All right, working my way through the question board here. If anyone else has anything, please feel free to put it up there. Doris points out that they use tracking hours and used it as part of the in-kind gifts on grant applications. I hope that's good feedback for other people. Thanks, Doris. Board member activities. If you want to record the hours of your board members, then volunteer, and assuming they're a volunteer board, then volunteer hours makes the most sense to me on that. I would have the project code board activities and record those hours into the volunteer section. So yes, if you are recording board activities, volunteer hours in PastPerfect is a great place to do it. Project code 999 or 001 or whatever it might be for board activities. So Doris also asked the question, is there a chance of adding tracking for the interns as well? Doris, I think that this is a one-size-fits-all for this, whether we're talking about board volunteers, more traditional volunteers, or interns. It's generally just recording people's time on projects. In a lot of ways, I think we could rename the volunteer tab the project tab so we would know what people are working on. So yes, I think keeping track of it in your volunteer hours is a great way to track those intern deals. Now, if you follow my guidance on group things together and be descriptive in their project name instead of that or thing back on that sheet that I showed, let me show it again. So if you follow this top level of guidance, number 3 through 10, notice it leaves your activities free. So if you're just trying to track intern work, like art show planning, for instance, you might have 40 hours that are put into it from your traditional volunteers and 15 hours from your intern. If you somehow want to keep track of that, wouldn't it be great to have an activity that was intern? So you could then record all of your intern under activities. So I think using activities is a great way to show what the interns have done. So interns would also flag their hours with intern there in activities. Ron asked, can the activity name or description be sorted? I believe it's sorted alphabetically in the authority file, but I'll have to look into that, Ron. I'm not 100% sure. If it's not working the way you think it should, let us know, and we'll look into making a change. If board meetings, if you're keeping track of board meetings and you want to make that one of your projects, board meeting project, you probably have 2 different pieces of that. Board meeting planning, and then board meeting, actually the volunteer hours that are spent for people attending that meeting. Mike asked, can we only use up to 999 for project codes? Mike, I'm not really 100% sure what number of characters that field will hold. I really like the 3-digit number for coding. I think once you get over that, it's too much. Once you have under that, it's not enough. So I like the 3-digit. I do like it broken down into the hundreds, but as soon as you get past 10 project codes, it doesn't quite work. So you kind of have to feel it out depending on your organization's need for different project codes. I will say that if you have more than 30 or 40 projects listed here, it starts to get unwieldy that you may want to then start thinking about using the activities tool because once you get to 40, your down arrow and which project you're selecting gets pretty big. So you may want to consider being less specific and grouping with activity. Yeah, Robert, great question. Robert asked, is there or will there ever be an option to create and print schedules? For example, monthly tours. Robert, we have looked into this several times and continue to look into it. I would love to see a scheduling service as part of PastPerfect software. It's really difficult to get a consensus on how it should work. And since we service so many organizations, trying to get them to agree on that this is the standard that we should follow is pretty tricky. It's something we will continue to look at putting into PastPerfect in the future. I'm pretty certain you're not going to see it in version 5. It might have to wait for the next revision of the software. Mandy says that she has a complex, well, let me finish reading. I'll read it to you in a second. Mandy, I'm not sure I can answer this without really talking to you about it, so please feel free to give me a call. I'm not going to be in the office this afternoon, but if you want to talk tomorrow or later in this week, I'd be happy to talk to you about it. We can figure out how we can best make it suit with your various levels of awards and things. So thanks a lot. James asks, is there a way to mass assign volunteer hours? So could I take a whole list of people and give them 1 hour each or 5 hours each? So for instance, if I had a board meeting, could I then credit all 20 people with 2 hours of volunteer hours? Not yet, but it's a neat suggestion. It's the first time I've heard it, so something we might think about adding. By the way, all of this chat stuff that's happening here, I get a listed report of it at the end that will kind of remind me of what we talked about and what we might be able to do. So thanks for these suggestions, too. I do appreciate them. Can you show us all of your code listings? Yeah, Kathy, the screen I have up right now is that Excel sheet, so I'm going to close out of that and go back to PastPerfect and under Setup and Contacts. My volunteer projects. These are my code listings here. I don't have a secondary piece of paper here to give you more. That okay, yeah. So I also have. So I might also have sort of some transportation grouping or other gardening things. But in the evaluation of our software, I've just put these things in. So there's not really a whole lot more to see. All right, so Ron asks if I could survey you all that are in training today. I'm going to put your hands down. How many of you have volunteers for what he's referring to as RSVP? Raise your hand if you have volunteers from RSVP. All right, Ron, I'm looking here, and I'm seeing about 6 hands up out of the 60 people that are still in class. So I hope that's helpful for you. Now that could be, the number actually could be 15 and that a number of them don't know how to raise their hand. So it might be that, but it gives you hopefully some idea how many people are receiving volunteers from RSVP. Mandy says, is there a way to generate a report of people that have a certain level of volunteer hours? Mandy, this is another one we should talk about together. I'm going to take a look. This is going to be a little bit on the fly here, but I'm going to take a look at the contacts database behind the scenes. I believe we have a summary of this, but maybe not. Don't worry about if your screen looks like it's really wigging out here. I'm just looking quickly to see if I can get a volunteer summary hours. For those who don't know, this is what the database looks like behind the scenes. And there is, like this vol Sunday means that if there's a true, that they're a volunteer available for Sunday. I'll look at it again. I'm not seeing it off the cuff here, Mandy, on that the contacts database gives you a total number of hours, but it's something that, and I think it's a great suggestion so that you can more easily get all of your people that have a certain level. And it might be with reporting, it might be with adding a database. Definitely something to consider doing. Yeah, Deborah says, where do you recommend we put volunteer birthdays so we can acknowledge them? Well, you know who your volunteers are by looking at that list. So you could get a list of everyone with volunteer status, and you'll have those 18 people. And if you also wanted to know when their birthday was, you would secondary query on their contacts under the biography information here, their birthday field. So a way you could do that quickly is, let's say we want to know all of our volunteers that were born in May, as Karen Slater should be. I would do query, and then do birthday greater. Oh, this is going to be a problem. I'm going to have to think about this a little bit more, because when we're talking about a birthday greater than, we're talking about the year. So we can't group them then by May. So this actually might take another report. There's a lot of great suggestions coming out of this webinar. I'm glad we did it. So what I think you want to do is you want to say, all right, so give me my list of May birthdays, so at the monthly volunteer meeting, I can make sure I acknowledge them or put them into our newsletter or something like that. Great suggestion. A lot of organizations, and Doris pointed out here, that a lot of organizations will allow their volunteers to actually enter their volunteer hours into the database, and that's come up a couple of times. I think it's okay. If you have a log-on for your volunteers to record their own hours, they're going to give you the most accurate information about how long they spent on something. But they're also going to be, because there's many, many hands and not one set of eyes looking at it, they're also going to be the most inconsistent on picking the right thing. So I would suggest that you have your volunteer hour data entry by one person. That way they're getting to know the volunteers. Whoever kind of the lead person there would be the one that would get people to the right categories. And Deborah says that her volunteers handwrite down the hours and she counts them up. She also points out, and I think that this is a good question, about if she's doing this work anyway, then what's the point of putting it into PastPerfect? And Deborah, I would say that the key work here is being able to group things together and then generate reports on that information in a time basis. You can go through and recalculate this stuff every time somebody says, well, how many volunteer hours happened in 2010? Maybe you have a summary of that information. Well, how many volunteer hours happened at the log cabin refurbishing in 2010? And you might have to go back to your original source and do the count up. I would hope that PastPerfect would be able to produce that report for you much quicker. Bev asked, did I talk about why to use the location field as we're recording this? My example is with the Living History organization. So when you're recording a volunteer hours here, you put in the date, the hours, the project, the activity. So let's say that the project is interpretation and the activity is first-person interpretation at the old church. Location, then, it would seem, would be duplicate information to be old church. But location might be really important if you're trying to keep track of where volunteers were working around the community to raise funds. So it could be useful for you. It may not. I haven't seen great examples for how people are using this other than trying to record which building at the Living History Museum that the person was doing interpretation in. Yeah, Mandy says, could you just do your filter statement for birthdays with 2 different filters? Unfortunately, Mandy, no. At the point where you're comparing dates, you'd have to look at each year that your volunteers may have been born in order to get that answer. So it's going to take a change to the program in order to get the volunteer birthdays list, which I still think is a great idea. We probably also want to be able to have it for our board birthdays list or our members' birthday list. It sounds like just a relatively simple, great addition to our software. So maybe we'll name it after you. Doris points out that another reason to do that hard work of transcribing the information from paper into PastPerfect is that you know that PastPerfect is getting backed up, so it becomes part of a routine, and I think that's a great point. Thanks, Doris, for bringing that up. For those who don't know, we recommend every day you work in PastPerfect, you click on this button right here, backup data to hard drive. That takes a zipped up copy of your data, including these volunteer hours, and puts it on your hard drive. Also, for people who are looking for more information about managing contacts, managing volunteers, we are having a regional training. We call it a regional training, but it's now all online, an online regional training class. It's a 3-day class coming up in January. There's more information at our website and in our newsletter with it. I don't have the dates right in front of me, and my door is closed, so I can't see my calendar. But that's the upcoming training in January is our collections training class. Sandy says, can code be used for volunteer projects and membership types? Yes, those two fields do not overlap at all. So if you're using membership type 100 or a membership code 100, using the project code in volunteers for 102, there's no relationship. Yeah, Kathy points out that they had a display, like I would think a booth or something, set up at a local registration night, which was held in an arena nearby, and that was a useful place for her to record the location of the volunteer hours, so that she would have volunteer hours maybe as a project code, community outreach, and then what place in the community they were doing that out, give them a history of where they were. I didn't talk about it much, but that notes field is another great place to kind of keep that information. I do question, though, on how easy it is to access. So I don't know that, per se, it would be the best place to do your summary notes of how worthwhile that activity was. But putting in additional notes of how it was set up and what it looked like might be important as you go back years later to say, should we go and set up our booth there again? Marianne, I'm not sure what you mean by a webinar for coding, but I'd be happy to talk to you about it. So you can either email me or give me a call sometime. All right, so we're about at the end of our hour here, and I want to thank everyone for coming. I've gotten through all of the questions I can see here. I may some, and I do apologize for that. If I did miss your question and you want to talk, please feel free to get in touch with me. Again, it's Brian, B-R-I-A-N, at museumsoftware.com, or you can call us, 1-800-562-6080, extension 102. I will not be in the office this afternoon, but I will be in the office later this week and the second part of next week. Our holiday hours have us closed on Monday and Tuesday. So thank you again for coming. I hope this helps with your volunteer projects, and have a great day. I'm going to hang up the phone now. I'll try to answer a few more questions online, and we'll talk again soon.